Hi there, Steve Kaufman here today I'm going to talk about repetition and novelty. And if you enjoy my videos on language learning, please subscribe. By the way, I am closing in on 100,000 subscribers, so I don't know what I'll do when I hit that number. Maybe I'll go out with my wife or we'll open a bottle of champagne at home. But it's been fun. Over the past 10 years, I've really enjoyed doing this because it's part of what I'm interested in, which is learning languages. Over the past 10 years, while I've been making these videos, I think I've learned 7 or 8 languages, and now I'm on to Greek, as you know. So it's very much part of what I'm doing and what I enjoy doing, and I like sharing my experience with others. And my experience does also include reading on how languages are acquired. So, repetition. Obviously, repetition is good. You need to see words many times before they stick. You need to see certain patterns in the language many times before they start to become part of, what you're comfortable doing. But as I have pointed out before, when I mentioned the work of Robert Bjork, who talks about interleaving, we can't just focus on sort of a limited amount of data and just try to master it because we read it over and over again, hoping that it's going to stick in our brain. It won't. It's you're going over the same ground all the time, and every time you go over the same ground, you're picking up less and less. So it's very important to vary that with novelty. I often quote Manfred Spitzer, the famous German neuroscientist, who said to learn, the brain needs repetition and novelty. You have to feed the brain something new, and I'm assuming people are curious. Anyone who isn't curious for novelty isn't going to learn. Anyone who thinks they can simply by rote memory and by not being curious about the language, how the language works, curious about things in the culture, that person simply isn't going to learn. So, or very well. So plain repetition, rote memory, although there are people who swear by it, I'm going to memorize the most important 1,000 words, I'm going to memorize the grammar, ace the grammar. I have never found that works. And I noticed that recently because with my Greek, I've been doing our mini stories. And I've now got up to 40 mini stories that we have loaded up at Link, audio and text. And but because our writer who's writing these stories has now slowed down, we don't have any new stories, and therefore they haven't been translated. And so I'm going over the same stories over and over and over again because the, say, newspaper articles that I can find on the internet are still too difficult for me for Greek. So I stay with these stories. But I'm realizing that I'm getting less and less out of them. And that when I go and do a newspaper article or something more difficult, and I come back to the stories again, the simple stories, I get a little more again because I've varied it a bit. So it's very important to introduce that novelty. And it doesn't just apply to that. And also, not only novelty, but that sense that you're moving forward, that you're achieving. So if I read something on Link where there are a lot of blue words and I'm converting them to yellow, I'm looking them up, then I have the sense that I'm achieving something. Whereas if I'm going over the same stuff over and over and over again, hoping that it's going to gradually, cause my neurons to fire together, but after a while I think there's just no novelty there. And so the return on investment is less and less. And this applies to many things. It applies to grammar. Get 3 grammar resources. Read them all. Cover the same ground from 3 different angles. Before we had Link, I used to buy 3 starter books. Teach Yourself, Colloquial, Living Language. Cover the same ground from 3 different angles, or borrow them from the library. In other words, the greater the variety that you can introduce to your repetition, the more fresh then that repetition is going to be. And I even find that when I go, say, in my Greek and I do something very difficult and I'm struggling and stuff, when I go back then to my Greek stories, I'm picking up more. And another thing that I've done, talking again about variety and repetition, because the Greek stories, the original recordings of them were very fast, and in some ways it was good because it made me more comfortable with someone speaking quickly. But then I thought maybe some of our learners would be discouraged by having the audio so fast. So I asked Pavlos, our Greek translator and fellow who's doing the recordings, to do them again more slowly. And now I listen to them again slowly, and I'm picking up a lot more. So just varying the speeds is another form of introducing novelty, variety. So I think that's extremely important, not to rely on rote memory or any, expectation that by really focusing on learning and repeating that somehow things are going to stick. You have to follow Manfred Spitzer's advice. You have to mix up the repetition with the novelty. So there you have it. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.